You think you know what isolation is? You think you know what fear feels like? Nah, man, you've got no clue until you've been truly, completely alone. Listen. Right now, as you're hearing this, I'm sitting in my cabin in North Fork, Alaska. It's been 3 days since I've seen another human face and 4 hours since I saw him, the twisted man, looking through my window. And I'm about to tell you exactly what he did next. If you've ever felt that chill behind your neck when you're home alone, trust me, you need to hear this whole story. It's the real deal. It's not just about a ghost or a monster. It's about what happens when your own mind turns against you, and you realize the one thing you ran from was you. You want to know the whole messed up truth? Then stick with me. This is MindLoop. And if this story hits you, if you feel that knot of fear tightening in your gut, then you know what to do. You gotta lock in right now. Don't scroll, don't skip, just hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed for more, because once this is over, you'll be craving the silence of your own room. You'll be double-checking your own window. My name is Leo Maxwell, I'm 32. Or I was. Now I'm just Leo from North Fork. A year ago I was living the cliché. An apartment in Boston, a dead-end corporate gig, and a therapist who told me to embrace the quiet. Quiet. What a joke. The city was loud, but my head was deafening. After my folks passed and a breakup that gutted me, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of concrete and fake smiles. I needed an escape. A total reset. I saw the listing online. Remote Alaskan cabin, full solitude guaranteed. 90 grand. A steal. It was a weather-beaten cedar box tucked deep in the North Fork wilderness. No neighbors, no cell service, just miles of spruce, snow, and silence. I packed my life into a beat-up pickup and drove 3,000 miles to find peace. And for a couple of months I did. The air was clean, the silence was thick, and the stars were so bright they felt like a personal secret. I'd wake up, chop wood, fish the creek, and read. It was simple. It was zen. I started to feel better. The city noise in my head was finally fading. Then I found the journal. It was wedged behind the bottom drawer of the built-in desk, wrapped in a worn piece of canvas. The cover was thick leather, and the pages were yellowed, filled with tight, frantic handwriting. It belonged to the previous owner, a guy named Will Lenning. At first, it was just the rambling of a lonely man, notes on weather, supply runs, hunting. But then, around the middle of the book, the tone shifted. The handwriting became shaky, the lines slanted. He started writing about shadows. October 14th, saw it again. Not a bear, not a moose. Just a twisted shadow. Too tall, too thin. It's watching. I laughed it off. Cabin fever, right? I figured Will was just some old coot who went nuts from the isolation. I threw the journal on a shelf and didn't think twice. The first real sign that I hadn't just bought a cabin but a problem came a week later. I was sitting by the fire reading. It was around 11 p.m. The cabin felt warm, smelled like pine and smoke. Everything was normal. Then the fire crackled, and I heard it. A scratching sound. Not on the roof, but on the outside wall, right next to my head. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like a rake dragging slowly across the rough cedar. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, and suddenly, the zen I'd been working on was gone. All the old, panicked city energy came rushing back, but this time, it was laced with something new. Pure, Arctic fear. "Hello?" I yelled, my voice sounding weak and thin against the overwhelming silence of the wilderness. The scratching stopped. I grabbed the only thing I had, an old iron poker, and slowly crept to the window. The cabin was pitch black except for the light from the fire, which cast a huge, shaky shadow of me onto the snow outside. I peered through the glass. Nothing. Just the endless white ground and the black skeletal trees. I told myself it was just a branch, knocked by a gust of wind. A small animal. Anything but what my gut was screaming. I put the poker down, but I couldn't sit still. I grabbed a beer, tried to calm down, but every 10 seconds, I was glancing at the window. I needed to see what was out there. So, I did the stupid thing. The thing you only do in horror movies. I put on my coat and boots. I grabbed my rifle, a 30-06, and I stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me like a physical punch. It smelled like ice and pine needles. The moonlight was so bright I could see for 100 yards. Still nothing. But then, as I scanned the woods, my flashlight beam landed on the snow right beside the cabin wall. And what I saw wasn't a branch, wasn't an animal. It was a set of footprints. They were long and deep, but what made the blood turn to ice in my veins was that they were barefoot. In the middle of an Alaskan winter where the temperature had dropped below zero. And they didn't lead away from the cabin. They led around it. I tracked them for maybe 10 steps, and that's when I noticed the pattern. The prints were elongated. They weren't a normal stride. It was like whoever or whatever made them was dragging its feet. And at one point, one set of prints had stopped, right where my bedroom window was. The print was pressed deep, and it was so long, so stretched out. It was a full, unnatural step. I swallowed a huge gulp of cold air. That's when the second thing hit me, and it was the real kicker. The final twist that shut down my brain's ability to rationalize. I had bought this cabin specifically because it was surrounded by miles of unbroken wilderness. The closest road was 6 miles away. The closest neighbor was 15. So how did a barefoot person or creature get here? And why was it staring at me from the snow? I went back inside, locked the door, and that journal on the shelf suddenly felt like a bomb. I had to read it. I had to know what Will Lenning saw, because whatever it was still here. And now, it knew I was here too. I slammed the cabin door shut, locked the deadbolt, threw the rifle on the table. My breath was ragged, fogging up the air inside. Barefoot prints. That's all my brain could loop on. Barefoot. In 30 below weather. This wasn't some hiker, dude. This was messed up. I didn't even bother taking off my coat. I lunged for that dusty leather journal on the shelf. I ripped the canvas wrapping off, the leather creaking like old bones. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I flipped past the boring stuff, the grocery lists, the weather notes, straight to the manic scribble I'd seen before. Will Lenning wasn't just rambling. He was documenting. I found the first entry that mattered. It was dated a year before I bought the place. Deck 3rd. The silence is heavy now. Too heavy. I heard the thumping again, deep in the woods. Sounds like metal dragging, but slow, rhythmic. I thought it was the wind, but it's always too still when it happens. Then I saw the thing. It wasn't a shadow. It was standing at the tree line, just staring at the cabin. It was twisted, like a man made of brittle sticks, too tall for its frame. Its limbs, they didn't bend right. I didn't see a face, but I felt its eyes. It's watching me, Leo. I know it. Wait. He used my name. I had to read that line again. It's watching me, Leo. I threw the book back onto the table. That's impossible. That's nuts. Will Lenning wrote that a year ago. How the heck could he have written my name? It had to be a typo. Maybe he meant Len or Lo. No, it was clearly written L-E-O. Screw this. My heart was jackhammering in my chest. This was exactly what I'd run away from. The feeling of losing control, of the world making no sense. I picked up the journal again, needing the answers, even if they were terrifying. The entries got worse. They were just dates and fragments filled with a sick kind of dread. Jan 12th. He stands closer now. Every night. He doesn't move, just leans. I named him the Twisted Man. His skin is like raw, pale bark. He's always smiling, but I can't see his mouth. It's a smile you feel in your bones. Jan 18th. He's at the window. I can hear his nails scraping the glass. That metallic thump is coming from inside the walls now. It's not a ghost. It's something physical. Something that shouldn't exist. Jan 25th. He wants me to look, to acknowledge him. I won't. I won't look. He knows I'm weak. He's playing a game. He's trying to break my mind. And honestly, he's winning. I was breathing short, shallow gasps. My chest felt tight. Everything Will described, the relentless watching, the scraping, the the rhythmic metallic thump. It all matched. The thump I heard outside, the one I thought was an animal. Will had heard it too, and he said it was inside the walls. I looked up. The cabin walls felt too close, too solid. They weren't protecting me. They were trapping me. I tried to rationalize it one last time. Maybe the name Leo was a coincidence. Maybe the metallic thump was just a water heater pipe acting up. Maybe the footprints were just big feet. But the dread was too heavy, too real to deny. I had to get out of this isolation bubble. I needed a human voice. I grabbed my satellite phone, the one expensive piece of kit I'd bought for emergencies. I flipped it open, my finger hovering over the only number I had saved. Steve, the hunter who occasionally checked my propane tanks, the only person for 15 miles. No signal. I swore under my breath, feeling the panic spike. The weather had probably knocked the satellite offline. I was on my own. It was late, pitch black outside, and the twisted man was out there. He was watching. I paced the cabin, checking the windows, all small, triple-paned, frozen shut. I checked the back door, bolted tight. I told myself, "You're safe. The doors are locked. He's just a psycho or a ghost. He can't get in." That's the moment I walked past the full-length mirror hanging on the wall, the one I used for shaving. And that's the moment I saw him. Not outside. In the reflection. He was standing right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My feet were cemented to the floor. The fear didn't scream, it just settled cold and heavy in my stomach. The reflection was crystal clear, sharper than my own image. He was tall. Too tall. His body was thin and elongated, arms hanging down past his knees. He was completely naked, skin pale and stretched tight over bone, like old, sun-bleached driftwood. His head was tilted sideways at a painful, unnatural angle, twisted. And his eyes, they were deep, black, and staring right at my reflected face. But the worst part, the thing that made me gag, was the smile. It wasn't just a grimace. It was a wide, stretching smile that went from ear to ear, splitting his face. A smile that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife. Then I heard a whisper. It didn't come from behind me. It came from the reflection itself, from the twisted man's carved smile. "You finally looked, Leo. Welcome home." The reflection vanished. The mirror was empty, showing only my pale, terrified face. But the metallic thump sound, it was no longer in the walls. It was right next to my ear. And it was wet. I finally spun around, rifle raised, screaming. There was nothing there, just the empty space where the mirror had shown the figure. Then I saw it. On the floor, right where the twisted man had been standing in the reflection. A puddle. Dark, thick, and rusty red. It smelled like old pennies and dirt. It was blood. I scrambled back from that dark puddle. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Blood. Real blood. Not the kind of stuff you spill chopping wood. This was thick, coagulated, and smelled metallic, like a butcher shop mixed with old dirt. This wasn't some spooky ghost. This was something physical. Something that could leave a mark. Something that could bleed. Or maybe, something that caused others to bleed. I stared at the puddle, then at the mirror, then back at the blood. The question wasn't if the twisted man was real anymore. The question was, what the hell was he? And why the hell was he here? I wiped my clammy hands on my jeans and snatched up the rifle. I needed to know what Will Lenning did. I had to finish that journal. If Will had a way out, I needed to find it. I flipped through the journal again, past the entries about the scraping and the smile. I landed on the last few pages. They weren't just writing anymore, they were scrawls, violent, jagged lines that cut through the paper. Feb 1st. He brought her back. He brought Sarah back. She's standing at the tree line too. She doesn't look right. She's singing that lullaby. He wants me to think he's protecting me. He wants me to think the bad thing is coming from the woods. But I know the truth now. The twisted man is the alarm clock, not the fire. Feb 3rd. I tried to tell Steve. Steve told me I was losing it. He said I should leave, but I can't leave Sarah. The twisted man is just a clown, a distraction, the real sickness. It's what happens when you're alone long enough. It's what you let in. Feb 5th. He's winning. He's always winning. I looked in the mirror today. I saw his smile. It wasn't a reflection. It was me, the long limbs, the twist. It was a reflection of what I'd become. He didn't come for me. I created him. I needed an enemy. Now he's coming for the real enemy. Steve is the threat. He knows what happened to Sarah. The twisted man is warning me. The blood. It's a warning, not an attack. The last entry was dated 2 days before Will Lenning vanished. It wasn't written, it was just a drawing. A hideous stick-figure man with an unnaturally long neck, leaning to the side, with a huge, carved smile. Beneath it, scrawled in thick black ink that looked suspiciously like old blood, were 2 words: "Don't trust." My gut clenched so hard it made me dizzy. Steve. The only person I knew out here. The only person I'd saved on my sat phone. Will Lenning was saying the twisted man wasn't the demon. He was the warning. The actual danger was human. The actual danger was Steve. I looked at the blood puddle again. Will's final, desperate warning. The puddle wasn't just blood. It was a physical manifestation of Will's fear about Steve. My paranoia, already at 100%, went supernova. I locked down the cabin even harder, pushing the kitchen table against the front door, just like in a bad slasher movie. Then, I heard it. A truck engine. Faint at first, then growing louder, grinding over the frozen snow outside. Steve. My throat went dry. It was past midnight. Steve never came out here at night. He usually stopped by around noon. This felt wrong. This felt like the climax of Will's journal. I ran to the tiny kitchen window and peered out. Steve's battered green pickup was idling 20 yards from my porch. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed was terrifying. Then, Steve stepped out. He was a big burly guy, always wearing a thick worn Carhartt jacket. But he wasn't carrying his hunting rifle. He was carrying a can of gasoline and a long, thick coil of rope. He looked up at the cabin, and even from this distance, in the weak moonlight, I saw his eyes. They weren't friendly and crinkly like they usually were. They were flat, cold, and utterly dead. He wasn't here for propane. He was here to finish what Will Lenning wrote about. My heart was beating so fast it hurt. This was the reveal. Not some spooky ghost story, but a psychological horror movie. Will Lenning's fear of the twisted man was just a coping mechanism for the real-life monster, the guy who helped him fill his propane tank. Steve started walking toward the cabin, slow and deliberate. I knew I couldn't wait for him to try and break in. I had to know. I had to confront the monster Will couldn't. I yanked the rifle up and pointed it at the front door. "Steve, get the hell away from my cabin." My voice was shaking, but it was loud enough. Steve stopped dead. He slowly turned his head toward my window. A lazy, cold smile spread across his face. "Leo," he drawled, his voice deep and calm. "I just came to check on you, buddy. Heard you were having some trouble sleeping." He slowly raised his left hand, and my eyes immediately focused on something he was holding. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, crudely carved piece of wood. It was a stick figure, tall and unnaturally thin, with its head tilted to the side. A stick figure that looked exactly like the twisted man drawn on the last page of Will's wife, Steve said, his voice dropping to a sickening whisper. "She started seeing this thing too. She started getting messages from it, telling her to run. I didn't like that. People shouldn't run from the quiet, Leo. They should embrace it." He stepped closer, and that's when I saw the axe tucked into the back of his belt. The twisted man wasn't a monster. He was a tally mark. A warning left behind by a victim for the next poor soul who bought the cabin. Will saw the killer, and his mind created the twisted man to process the impossible terror. The twisted man in the mirror. That was Steve's reflection, superimposed over mine, smiling his carved, sickening smile. I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if I didn't shoot, I was dead. I had to end the story Will Lenning couldn't finish. I couldn't breathe. My hands, wrapped around the rifle stock, were slick with sweat. Steve, standing outside, holding a child's stick figure drawing of a monster, with an axe tucked into his belt. "Don't be a hero, Leo." Steve's voice was muffled by the thick door, but it was calm, conversational, like he was asking about the weather. That calm was worse than any rage. "Just open the door. We can talk about Will and Sarah and that thing you saw in the mirror." He knew. He knew about the reflection, about the blood. He knew the twisted man was my mind breaking, not a ghost haunting the woods. He was playing a psychological game and he was winning. Suddenly, the front door shuddered. Steve wasn't waiting. He was using his entire body weight, lunging against the barricaded door, trying to splinter the frame. Crack! The old wood groaned. I pressed the barrel of the rifle to the peephole. I didn't want to kill him, but I couldn't let him in. This wasn't about surviving a haunting anymore. It was about surviving a murderer who felt entitled to end my life. "I know about the journal, Steve. I know you killed Will and Sarah. The twisted man was their warning to me," I shouted, trying to sound tougher than the shaking mess I was. Steve paused his attack. A chilling, high-pitched laugh came through the door. "Oh, bless your little heart, Leo. You think it's that simple? You think you figured out the twist?" He leaned in close to the door. "You think Will Lenning was scared of me? Nah, man. Will was a mess. He ran out here to escape his own head, just like you. And when he got here, the quiet showed him something horrible. It showed him exactly who he was." My blood ran cold. What was he talking about? "Will saw the twisted man because Will was the twisted man," Steve whispered. He'd spend hours at the window staring at his reflection in the dark glass, carving those hideous sticks, thinking the thing was outside when it was always inside his own sick head. Crash! Steve hit the door again, harder. The table holding it collapsed. The door wasn't fully open, but the frame was hanging by a thread. "I found Will a year ago, Leo. He'd done himself in, right where you found that puddle." Steve's voice was closer now. "But before he did, he told me something. He told me the twisted man. He talked to him, and it wasn't a warning. It was a demand." The air went thick. I was hit by a wave of crushing regret and self-realization. I had been so focused on the monster being a murderer, a human threat, that I missed the psychological key in the journal. Will wrote, "I created him. I needed an enemy." The door flew inward with a final splintering crack. Steve stood there, framed in the cold darkness. He was huge, his face distorted by the fury of the break-in, but his smile was gone. He looked sad. "The twisted man told Will, and he told me, Leo, you think this wilderness is a new start? You think you can outrun the darkness in your soul? No. You came here because you were already broken, and the only way out is to share the burden." He raised his hand, not to strike me. He was pointing past me. "That thing you saw in the mirror? That wasn't me, Leo. I was miles away. That was him. He's bonded to this place, to anyone who tries to find peace here. The blood, the thump. It's the anchor." Suddenly, Steve's face crumpled. His eyes were wide with genuine terror. He wasn't the calm killer anymore. He looked like a victim. "He's using me, Leo. He used Will. He makes us do things to feed the silence, to keep the twisted man alive. I didn't want to come here tonight. I didn't want to burn the cabin. But he makes you do it." I stared at him, my finger on the trigger. He wasn't just a killer. He was a hostage. A puppet whose mind was broken by the sheer, crushing loneliness of North Fork, weaponized by the spirit that fed on that brokenness. The twisted man was the ultimate psychological horror, a parasitic entity that made people believe they were the monster, forcing them to commit unspeakable acts to maintain its terrifying existence. Steve lunged, but not at me. He lunged for the rifle. He wasn't trying to shoot me. He was trying to get me to shoot him. "End it, Leo, please, before he makes you do it too." he screamed, his voice raw with despair. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening, a monstrous roar in the silent woods. The recoil slammed into my shoulder. Steve stopped, his eyes wide, a look of profound, agonizing peace washing over his features. He didn't fall. He just slumped against the shattered doorframe. But the bullet didn't hit him. It hit the wooden stick figure he was holding. The little carving shattered into splinters. And as the wood disintegrated, Steve's body went rigid. His eyes darted past me, not at the wall, but at the empty space beside the kitchen counter. He gave a final, desperate gasp, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated fear. "He's here," Steve choked out, his voice barely a breath. "He's not outside anymore. He's inside your head, Leo. He's you now." Then, Steve collapsed, completely limp. Not from the gunshot, but from something else. Something that had just left him. I stood there, the smoking rifle heavy in my hands, staring at the dead man. The blood was spreading across the cabin floor, mixing with Will Lenning's rusty puddle. I felt sick, hollow, but also clear. The fear was gone. And then, I felt it. The twist. The ultimate, terrifying realization. The wet, metallic thump sound. It wasn't outside. It wasn't on the floor. It was my heartbeat, thumping hard against my ribs. And it was wet, because I was crying. Crying tears of pure, terrifying self-recognition. The absolute silence that followed the gunshot, that wasn't a gunshot, was heavier than any noise. Steve's body lay still on the porch, a silent monument to the cost of loneliness. I stood over him, the rifle finally slipping from my numb fingers. It clattered to the floor, but I barely heard it. All I could hear was that thump, thump, thump. My own heart. And it wasn't beating with fear anymore. It was beating with a cold, terrifying certainty. The twisted man wasn't a supernatural entity that stalked the woods. It was a psychological parasite that fed on the isolated mind. It took the deepest fear, the regret, the guilt you brought with you, and gave it a face. A twisted, carved smile. It made you see yourself as the victim, while slowly twisting you into the monster it needed to survive. Will Lenning was broken, and the twisted man made him obsessively draw his terror. Steve was broken, and the twisted man made him a killer, driven by the entity's demand to share the burden. And now, I was the only one left. The cabin was wrecked. The evidence of a violent struggle was everywhere. I had technically survived a home invasion, but in my soul, I felt like I had just completed an initiation. I stumbled back, tripping over the splintered wood of the doorframe. My eyes fell on the shattered piece of wood, the stick figure Steve was holding. It was now just a pile of useless splinters. The twisted man, the little idol of terror, was gone. Or was he? I looked down at Steve's dead eyes. They were fixed on the kitchen counter, the empty space beside it. The space where the mirror had shown the reflection of the twisted man behind me in subpart 1.2. And as I looked, I realized what Will Lenning meant when he wrote about seeing the twisted man's smile in his own reflection. I slowly, trembling, picked up the shard of the mirror that had cracked when Steve hit the door. It was small, no bigger than my palm. I held it up. The reflection staring back was me, Leo Maxwell. But my face was chalk white, my eyes wide and bloodshot. My neck felt unnaturally stiff. My head held at a strange, uncomfortable tilt. And right beneath my gaze, running from the corner of my mouth to my ear, was a faint, red, scar-like line. It wasn't deep, but it was there, a tiny, fresh cut. It was the beginning of the carved smile, the metallic thump, thump, thump. Of my heart sped up, now hitting that sickly wet rhythm again. It wasn't blood I was crying. It was something else. Something the twisted man left behind. I slowly lowered the mirror shard. Steve was right. The twisted man wasn't outside. He wasn't even in the cabin. He was me. I had absorbed the terror, the guilt of killing Steve, the loneliness of North Fork. I was the next iteration, I was the one who would now be driven by the parasitic entity. I was the one who would start hearing the rhythmic thumping, who would start seeing the reflections, who would start carving the stick figures. I would become the next warning to the next person stupid enough to buy this beautiful, terrible cabin. I stood there surrounded by the silence and the snow, knowing I was trapped. Not by the lack of roads, but by the darkness of my own mind. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't run. Because everywhere I went, he would go too. You just heard the whole truth. You heard what I saw, what I felt, and what I became. You heard the story of the twisted man, and you know this isn't just a tale. This is a loop. A cycle of terror that never ends. I told you all this because I needed someone to know. I needed someone to hear the truth before the final quiet sets in. Now here's the thing. If this story messed you up even half as much as it messed me up, if that fear is crawling up your spine right now, then you know there are more MindLoop secrets buried in this world. There are more stories hidden in the quiet places. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to know how I escape, or if I even can escape, the ultimate twist. If you want to know what the twisted man makes me do to the next unlucky soul, then you gotta prove it. Hit that like button right now. If we hit 1,000 likes on this video, it tells me you're ready to dive back into the terrifying silence. More importantly, don't just lurk in the shadows. Join the loop. Become part of the few who dare to listen to the darkness. Subscribe to MindLoop right now. Because trust me, once you join the loop, you'll realize the stories you hear aren't just entertainment. They might just be warnings. And tell me in the comments below, what was the real reason the twisted man showed Will landing his wife Sarah at the tree line? Was it a distraction or something far worse? The story doesn't end here. The loop is tightening, and I'll be waiting for you.